Chapter 1. The canyon's threshold yawned before Aya like the maw of some slumbering leviathan, its lips etched with centuries of wind-whittled grooves, and stained by the ochre sands that clung to every crevice in layers as thick as sedimentary time itself. She pressed her slender back against the polished rock wall, each breath stirring motes of golden dust around her lithe frame, and peered into the yawning chasm with eyes that glowed faintly in the dusk emerald embers in the dying light. Below, the canyon floor stretched into a twisted labyrinth of low-angled plateaus and jagged outcroppings, each boulder and ridge an obstacle in the hunt for her mother's salvation. Lysera's bio-implant beacon pulsed weakly in her claw, the soft cadence of its flashing light betraying the rhythm of a life hanging by a slender thread. Every beat was a plea, every blink a whispered promise. Aya must not fail. Behind her, the wind carried the distant echo of predatory cries sandjackers on the prowl, their razor-mouthed jaws and sinewy limbs adapted over countless generations to shred prey into quivering husks at a glance. Their howls ricocheted off the cavern walls in dissonant choruses, a mocking testament to the cruelty of nature and of those who would twist it to their own merciless ends. With her heart thundering against her ribs, Aya lowered herself onto her stomach, letting her delicate foreclaws find purchase in the minute fissures of the rock. The cool surface pressed against her chest plate exoskeleton, offering a moment's respite from the stifling heat of the day that still lingered in the air. From this vantage point, she could see the maw of the trap, a cruelly ingenious snare wrought from blackened metal and living thorns, a grotesque marriage of alien engineering and twisted biology. Jagged tendrils of organic fiber, each lined with microscopic barbs, wreathed the carcass of the machine, feeding off its power to generate a slow, insidious tightening mechanism. From the center of this macabre scaffold hung Lysera, her lithe form suspended in midair, ribs quivering with each stifled sob that tore from her throat. The thorns had sunk into her skin, drawing blood that glistened in the faint bioluminescent glow emanating from her implant. Aya's vision blurred with tears she forbid herself to shed. There was no time for grief, only the cold necessity of action. Below the trap, the landing zone was a killing field of giant sand-scourge beetles, their iridescent carapaces shimmering with lethal beauty, and the razor-spine brambles that crawled across the earth like veins of some petrified leviathan. Any misstep would send Aya plummeting into the waiting jaws of death, either from the insects whose mandibles could cleave bone in a single bite, or from the brambles that would ensnare her limbs and crush the marrow within. Yet retreat was not an option. She would brave each hazard set before her, navigating the treacherous descent with every ounce of agility her species bestowed upon her small, sinewy body. Aya drew in a ragged breath and extended one trembling limb, fingertips brushing the cold metal of the snare's frame. She felt the residual hum of power in its core. The poachers who'd laid this trap had designed it for beasts far larger, trapped creatures to be sold into gladiatorial arenas on distant colonies. Her mother, bold and resourceful, had undoubtedly attempted to dismantle it, a desperate effort that had only activated its deadliest mode. Aya's bio-implant pulsed faster as she watched the thorns begin to writhe, eager to tighten, to deliver the final, crushing blow. Time was no ally. Gathering her courage, Aya dropped the few feet to the base of the trap, the wind whipping around her as she closed the distance. She felt the hairs on her neck stand on end. Danger lurked in every shadow. The sandjacker's howls grew louder now, a dissonant drumbeat calling forth the hunt. She set her small jaw, each breath of the chilling night air fueling her resolve, and reached into the pocket of chilled water. She carried precious drops collected from an oasis long abandoned, then brought forth a vial of her mother's homemade enzymatic solvent, a potent biochemical she had once used to dissolve insect hives. If applied with care, it could eat through the organic fibers without triggering the pressure sensors woven into their tendrils. Aya uncorked the vial, the liquid inside shimmering with opalescent hues under the bioluminescent glow of the snare. Her claw hovered above the nearest thorn, heart pounding so loudly she feared Lysera would hear it. She pressed the tip of the vial against the jerked joint where metal met flesh, and let a single bead of solvent roll along the surface. It hissed and smoked, eating into the fiber's core. At once, The snare shuddered, sensing the assault, and a deep electric thrum resonated through the metal. The thorns recoiled, then lashed outward, seeking purchase in anything within reach. Aya leapt back instinctively, the solvent having carved a perfect circle that threatened to claw itself closed with each passing second. As one thorn recoiled too quickly, its spikes sliced into her forelimb, and she trembled as excruciating pain bloomed across her flesh. But Aya's will did not falter. She rasped out a defiant cry, clutching her wounded limb to her chest, and forced herself to press onward. Each drop of the solvent was a calculated risk. Too much, and the snare's containment field would overload, triggering its self-destruct failsafe. Too little, and the fibers would retract and fuse, tightening their grip. Aya measured each bead with the precision taught to her by Lysera, her mother's gentle instructions echoing in her mind like sacred truths. She adjusted her aim, touching the vial's lip to the next vulnerable joint. The hissing intensified, the circle of damage widened, and for a heartbeat, the thorns shuddered in collective agony. Lysera's beacon pulsed faster, a frantic morse of hope and fear. Then, faint above the distant keening of the sandjackers, Aya heard it, the creak of shifting stone as someone or something stepped onto the canyon's rim. Aya froze, every muscle coiling like a spring. The wind carried the hushed whistle of cold steel being drawn from its sheath, accompanied by a voice deep and unfamiliar that broke the night's tense silence. "Child, stand back." Aya's breath caught. Her small frame shook as she turned her glowing gaze upward toward a silhouette outlined against the moonlit sky. A human, armor dark and battered, rifle slung across broad shoulders. His stance was wary, blade drawn in one strong hand, a warrior by every sign, though his stance spoke of exhaustion and caution rather than contempt. Aya's claw curled around the vial as she realized the truth blazing in her chest. This stranger was her only chance. She rose, pain and defiance warring in her brightness, and pressed the vial into the human's outstretched palm. "Solvent," she rasped, voice hoarse from exertion. "Use it on the spinal clamp. Don't overload the field." The human's helmeted head tilted, as though processing language or legend, and he nodded once, sharply. Underneath that nod lay a glimmer of empathy, a rare spark in a galaxy grown callous. He strode forward, gigantic strides swallowing the ground between them, and set to work with Aya's guidance, his powerful hands moving with surprising delicacy. As the human applied the enzymatic solvent and cut power conduits with surgical precision, the snare's pulse began to falter, its mechanical heartbeat stuttering. Lysera sagged in her bonds, her breathing ragged but unbroken, as the thorns slackened their merciless hold. Yet even as freedom drew near, the sandjackers descended flickering shapes at the canyon's edge, scales glinting with malice. The human scooped Aya up in one arm like a valiant knight cradling a charge of destiny, rifle clutched in the other, and opened fire. Each luminous round tore through the night, striking silvery arcs of hot plasma against the predator's armored hides. Aya pressed her small body against the strong warmth of his chest, her tears falling onto the metal of his breastplate, mixing sorrow with relief. In the hush between gunshots, Lysera's bonds clattered to the earth as the snare's field collapsed, thorns retracting and sparks sputtering out into the still air. Aya's heart thundered as she tumbled from the human's grip, landing beside her mother with a mixture of clumsy gratitude and relief so profound it took her breath away. Lysera's arms uncoiled like golden vines unraveling. She caught Aya to her chest, pressing her small daughter's tear-streaked face against her breast. Their whispered reunion blended in a symphony of sobs and joy, resonating long after the last sandjacker fell silent. Above them, the human stood sentinel, lowered rifle resting on his shoulder as he watched the two alien figures. Dust swirled around his boots, and the moonlight gleamed off the scars etched across his armor, silent testaments to battles fought and losses endured. Aya looked up at him with fierce gratitude burning in her luminous eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, voice cracking. He inclined his head, surveying the ruined snare with a mixture of satisfaction and caution. "The night is not safe," he rumbled, voice like distant thunder. "Stay close." As the canyon's quiet settled around them, broken only by the shallow breaths of mother and child reunited, Aya knew that an unbreakable bond had been forged in the crucible of peril, one that transcended the chasm of worlds between her people and his. And with that bond kindled, the true journey had only just begun. The cold wind that swept through the canyon that night carried more than the hiss of sand and the echoes of distant predators. It brought a promise of change, fragile as dew yet as certain as the turning of the stars. Aya, trembling in her mother's embrace, felt the rough edges of fear melt away beneath Lysera's steady heartbeat, replaced by a dawning hope that perhaps they would live to see the sun rise on Terran's crest once more. The human warrior Captain Elias Trent, as Lysera would learn, stood guard at the edge of the ruined snare, rifle lowered but ready. He wore the weight of countless battles and the jagged scars that marred his helm and in the faint tremor of fatigue in his shoulders. Yet his stance remained unyielding, a silent oath that no harm would come to the two alien survivors under his watch. With Lysera's bonds severed and the poacher's device reduced to smoldering scrap, the trio began the arduous climb out of the canyon. Aya's small form, still slick with tears and grime, clung to Trent's back as Lysera followed close behind, every step a testament to her survival instincts honed on alien hunting grounds. The canyon walls closed in overhead like ancient sentinels, but Aya felt lighter than she ever had, her fear transformed into fierce gratitude. She kissed Lysera's cheek, whispering a promise that she would never let harm befall her again, and felt the warmth of her mother's embrace return tenfold. Each footfall upward was a prayer answered, each gasp of cold desert air a reminder that life was both fragile and miraculous. By the time they breached the rim and spilled onto the open plain, the first pale fingers of dawn had begun to color the horizon in washed-out pinks and silvers, and Aya allowed herself a single, triumphant cry that joined the morning chorus of distant creatures awakening to a new day. Chapter 2. Dawn on Terran's crest revealed a world reborn. The endless dune seas glowed under a cool pastel sky, and the silhouettes of rocky spires stretched like ancient guardians across the horizon. Beneath that infinite dome of light, Captain Trent lowered Aya to the sand and offered Lysera a curt nod of respect before lowering himself to one knee, bringing his steel-gray eyes level with Aya's glowing gaze. "You fought bravely, little one," he rumbled, voice softer now that the immediate danger had passed. Aya, still clutching the vial of enzymatic solvent in her wounded claw, peered at him with a mixture of awe and shyness. This human was at once terrifying in his size and warmth, like a living mountain that hummed with quiet compassion. Lysera stepped forward, brushing sand from Trent's armor with the gentleness of water flowing over stone. "Your aid saved us both," she said in the soft roll of her native tongue. The words carried on a current of gratitude that needed no translation. Trent's gaze flicked to Lysera's bioimplant, still flickering weakly, and he reached into a pouch at his belt to retrieve a small cylindrical device. "I can stabilize her implant," he offered, producing a compact fusion battery adapted from his ship's med bay, "but I need your permission to interface with her system." Aya's mother hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding, her trust in this human forged in the crucible of shared peril. As Trent set to work, his large hands moving with deliberate care over the delicate connectors, Lysera cradled Aya close, murmuring ancient lullabies that shimmered on the dawn breeze. Around them, the desert silence held its breath, honoring the fragile alliance blossoming under the rising sun. And as the fusion cell hissed softly to life, its warming currents arcing through Lysera's implant, Aya looked up at Trent with fierce gratitude blazing in her eyes, knowing that their destinies had become entwined in ways neither species could have foreseen. The journey back to civilization would be perilous, littered with remnants of the poacher's cruelty and the ever-present threat of sandjackers prowling hungry across the dunes, but together, human and alien, mother and child, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The desert silence stretched on as Lysera allowed the warmth of Captain Trent's fusion cell to flood through her bioimplant, knitting shattered circuits and restoring the steady hum of vital functions she had feared irreparably damaged. Aya nestled against her mother's side, the child's luminous eyes never leaving the human's broad, scarred face, as if memorizing every line and ridge that told the story of battles survived and sacrifices made. Trent worked in near silence, the soft click of tools and the hiss of cooling vents the only sounds punctuating the hush of dawn. When he finally snapped the medkit shut, he rose with a weary groan, dust cascading from his armor like stardust shaken from ancient relics. Lysera tested her limbs, feeling strength returning with each measured movement, and offered Trent a small bow of gratitude that broke into a trembling smile. There, upon the shifting sands of Terran's crest, mother, child, and human formed an unlikely triad, bound by a shared ordeal that transcended language, species, and the enmity of distant starfaring worlds. With her implant stabilized and her wounds tended by Trent's field medic training, Lysera led the way down the dune-strewn path that wound toward the nearest oasis, an emerald gem of life surrounded by skeletal palms and crystalline springs. Aya rode perched upon her mother's narrow shoulders, the child's keen gaze sweeping the horizon for signs of renewed danger. Beneath the tidal sway of their journey, Lysera's gait remained graceful, yet deliberate as she recalled the hidden currents of sand and stone that could shift beneath unwary feet, knowledge passed down through generations of her people, honed on hunting expeditions that tested body and spirit alike. Trent followed behind, rifle slung over his shoulder, scanning the desolate beauty for movement, the flash of predatory eyes, the glint of scavenger drones that might seek to harvest them as trophies. Each footstep crackled over the granular earth, and with every breath of the balmy morning air, the promise of sanctuary drew closer, while the memory of the poacher's snare, its cruel tendrils, and the terror it had wrought gnawed at their resolve to seek justice rather than simply escape. By the time the trio crested a final dune and beheld the oasis's turquoise waters shimmering in the sun's golden glare, the heat of midday had already begun to bake the sands into shimmering mirrors of light. Lysera paused at the water's edge, letting Aya's small form scramble down to dip a single clawed foot into the cool liquid before plunging in entirely, geysers of droplets catching the light like scattered gems. Trent allowed himself a moment's respite as he knelt to fill his canteen, watching mother and child laugh despite exhaustion and scars. In that simple display of joy, an alien child's carefree delight in a world that had threatened to devour her, he recognized a spark he thought long lost in himself, the stubborn ember of hope that even in the darkest reaches of the galaxy, acts of compassion could light the way forward. As Aya emerged from the water, droplets sparkling along her amber form, Lysera placed her arms around the girl in a protective embrace, then turned to Trent with eyes that brimmed with determination. "We cannot leave the others behind," she said, voice steady now with purpose. "There are more trapped, more innocent lives torn apart by that cruel snare. Will you help us save them?" Trent met her gaze, the weight of his own past flickering across his expression, regrets for missions abandoned, lives he had failed to shield. Then he drew a slow breath and nodded, the motion carrying the gravity of a vow. "We'll find them," he vowed, voice low as the desert wind. "And we'll end this cruelty once and for all." Chapter 3. The hot winds of midday had stirred the dunes into roiling waves of gold as the newly formed alliance set out from the oasis, heading deeper into the canyon network where the poacher's snares lay hidden like malignant seeds awaiting a brutal harvest. Lysera led with the steadiness of a born hunter, her senses attuned to the faint hum of alien tech buried beneath the sand, while Trent scouted ahead, every rifle barrel sweep and footfall deliberate in its caution. Aya, perched on her mother's shoulder, kept vigil for the smallest glimmer of threat, a glittering drone flitting past a crag, the distant echo of a snare's activation pulse. Together, they moved like a living chain, each link reinforcing the other's strengths and compensating for every weakness. As they ventured deeper, the canyon walls rose once more, narrowing into a claustrophobic corridor where heat-blasted rock bore the scars of countless other trespassers who had come seeking fortune or vengeance. Here, the air was stale with the scent of disturbed sand and the acrid tang of spent fusion cells. Hunter marks glyphs etched in the walls warned away the unwary with stylized depictions of sandjackers and mechanical snares. Beneath these warnings lay the chilling certainty that this was not merely a hunting ground, but a domain claimed by merciless hunters who trafficked in living trophies. Lysera paused at a fork in the path, the stones beneath her feet vibrating with the soft hum of active power cores hidden in the dunes above. She placed a scaled hand on Trent's forearm, her touch urging silence, then gestured to the left with a curl of her claws toward a narrow fissure half buried by shifting sands. In that crevice lay the heart of the poacher's operation, a snarled nest of snares, each calibrated to ensnare creatures of varied mass, from the smallest burrowing skitters to leviathans that could fell desert fortresses. Aya's heart pounded with recognition and dread. She had seen similar devices in poacher transports traded on distant black markets, where living beings were reduced to commodities. Trent knelt to inspect the nearest snare, his gauntlet hand skimming its control lattice. The interface glowed with a wicked red pulse, awaiting the biometrics of its next victim to trigger the crushing clamp. He rose, voice barely above a whisper. They're drawing power from a central relay to the north like a nest. If we disrupt that, all snares go dead. Lysera's eyes narrowed, the same fierce calculation that had guided her through countless hunts sharpening in their depths. Then that is where we go, she affirmed, voice echoing against the canyon walls with the conviction of a battle cry. As the sun beat down mercilessly overhead, the trio advanced, every step weighed down by the knowledge of the lives at stake, the unspoken promise to free every soul unjustly caught in this web of cruelty. And above them, hidden in the shifting sands, eyes glowed with the anticipation of the hunt. Whether predator or prey remained to be seen would determine the fate of all three. Their passage deeper into the canyon brought a crushing stillness, as if the very stones conspired to smother sound and conceal the horrors that lay ahead. The three pressed on, shoulders brushing against jagged walls etched with crystalline veins of quartz that glittered like ghostly stars in the dim light. Aya clung to Lysera's neck, the child's eyes wide with both fear and fierce determination, as she watched her mother and Trent move with silent grace, two warriors bound by a shared purpose. The heat of the day grew oppressive, turning breaths into rasping fire, until at last they came upon the central relay buried beneath a collapsed spire of rock and sand. A humming tower of scavenged scrap rose before them, its twisted coils and raw conduits pulsing with a malevolent energy that sent tremors through the ground. From its core radiated the synchronized beat of every activated snare in the canyon, a mechanical heartbeat that quickened with each passing moment. Lysera dropped to one knee, touching the sand with a clawed hand and closing her eyes in concentration as she traced the hidden conduits back to the relay's control module. Beside her, Trent raised his rifle and instead of firing, placed an electro-hacking device against the tower's metal skin, an improvised tool he'd adapted from a derelict drone's control unit. Sparks flickered as he initiated the override, watching the interface shimmer with alien script until it flicked through diagnostic sequences and opened a backdoor into the relay's power grid. Aya pressed closer, her small form trembling with apprehension as she saw the wires within the tower writhe like serpents hungry for freedom. A single misstep, too much voltage, too little, could trigger a cascade failure, igniting the entire network in a storm of plasma and debris. Trent's brow furrowed in concentration as he guided the hack, isolating the control frequencies that bound the snares in unbreakable synchronization. Lysera murmured under her breath, reciting an ancient incantation of release taught to her by elders who had once freed captive beasts from tyrannical hunters. As father and daughter invoked the dual magics of flesh and machine, the relay's coils began to unwind, their red glow dimming to a sickly amber, then to a dull, lifeless gray. The lull that followed was profound, a silence so deep it felt alive, as though the canyon itself exhaled in relief. But victory was not yet secured. From the shattered remains of the relay's base, a resonance shuddered outward, channeled through hidden amplifiers and buried speakers woven beneath the canyon floor. A deafening roar filled the chamber as every snare across the labyrinthics sprang to maximum tension, their spikes and clamps snapping toward phantom prey with a final, desperate lunge. Trent seized Aya and bolted, tossing her onto Lysera's back as jagged metal and shards of rock rained down around them. Lysera's powerful legs propelled them in a sprint toward the canyon mouth, each stride propelled by the urgency of escape. Behind them, the relay's self-destruct sequence ignited in a cascade of molten metal, sending walls buckling inward and zephyrs of dust that blotted out the sky. The ground trembled in rebellion, threatening to swallow them whole in a final act of defiance. Aya buried her face in Lysera's scales, heart hammering against her ribs as the world broke apart around them. Then, with a last roar of primal fury, Lysera vaulted over a collapsing arch, landing on the open plains beyond just as the canyon entrance collapsed in on itself with a thunderous crash that echoed for miles. The tomb sealed for the cruelty it once harbored. Chapter 4. When the dust settled and the sun dipped low once more, the trio stood at the canyon's rim, silhouettes etched against the twilight sky. Aya tumbled free of her mother's embrace, landing with a soft thud on the cooled sands and scrambling to her feet with boundless relief. Lysera knelt beside her, gathering her child into arms slick with sweat and dust, and pressed a scaled cheek to Aya's hair in a gesture of quiet triumph. Trent watched them for a moment, the corners of his hardened features softening with an emotion that had long been foreign to him, pride in a victory won not with slaughter, but with compassion and unity. Behind them lay the shattered relay and the now-buried snares, avalanches of rocks sealing them beneath tons of stone, so their horrors would never again ensnare innocent life. As they turned toward the fading horizon, the distant lights of a settlement glimmered like beacons of hope, civilized hands waiting to heal, to welcome, and to learn of the bond forged between a human and an alien family under the prickling danger of the canyon's snare. Walking side by side, Lysera offered Trent a solemn vow in her native tongue, a pledge of eternal gratitude and friendship between their peoples. Aya's laughter floated on the evening breeze, a sound that reminded all three of the beauty that survived even the darkest cruelty. In that moment, beneath the vast expanse of an alien sky strewn with unfamiliar constellations, they understood that through shared courage and empathy, even the deepest chasms between worlds could be bridged. And so their journey continued onward, toward a destiny neither could have foreseen alone, united by the echo of a child's cry and the promise of a future shaped by compassion rather than fear. As they trudged across the cooling sands beneath a sky ablaze with the first stars of evening, Lysera recounted to Trent the ancient customs of her people, rituals of renewal performed at nightfall when the moon's pale glow sanctified the desert floor. She spoke of how each freed creature was honored with a dance of light, bioluminescent petals cast upon the wind to guide their spirits to safety. Aya, perched on her mother's hip, traced swirling patterns in the sand with her clawed foot, replicating the sacred sigils Lysera described. Trent listened in quiet awe, the rhythmic cadence of her voice stirring emotions he had long thought buried beneath layers of hardened duty. In that moment, the distance between human and alien diminished, bridged by stories whispered beneath the same tapestry of stars. The settlement's distant glow grew brighter, and with it the promise of healing. Medics who would tend Lysera's wounds, engineers to help repair the canyon's broken terrain, and scholars eager to record the tale of a child's courageous plea and the human who answered. They arrived at the settlement's edge just as lanterns were lit along the outer walls, their warm yellow lights sweeping across the encampment like a benediction. Children emerged from clustered tents to gape at Aya's glowing form, while elders offered Lysera curious bows and respectful nods in the universal gesture of welcome. Trent guided mother and child into the pavilion where translators waited, and as the words of trilingual greeting echoed through the courtyard, Lysera wrapped her arms around Aya once more, pressing her small brow to the child's, and whispered, "We are home." Aya's soft cry of joy rose to meet the chorus of celebration, a single note of hope that resonated through every heart, human and alien alike. Trent watched them, warrior, mother, and child united, and felt the weight of countless battles lift from his shoulders as he allowed himself, for the first time in many cycles, to believe in a galaxy where compassion ruled over fear. Under that alien moon, amid laughter and tears, the story of the snare's destruction became legend, a testament to the strength born in unity, the bond forged by a child's desperate cry, and the simple, transformative power of one human's choice to help. And as the winds of that desert night whispered across the dunes, they carried a single truth onward through the stars, that in even the harshest wilderness, kindness could blossom, and through that kindness, worlds could be saved. Thus ended one chapter of their journey, but the tale of Aya, Lysera, and Captain Elias Trent lived on, inspiring all who heard it to answer the cry for help, no matter how distant or unlikely the call may be.